Shalom. Thanks for joining me. I'm reading in Matthew chapter 8, continuing in chapter 8. Now, remember Matthew chapter 8 and 9 is where Matthew groups together several miracles that Jesus does, and the purpose of grouping them together is to demonstrate the authority that Jesus has. And in this section, we're starting at verse 18 and reading through verse 22, and this is entitled The Cost of Following Jesus. Now, there's a parallel passage of this in Luke's Gospel, chapter 9, verses 57 through 60. So let's read this now here in Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Now he's around the Sea of Galilee. He's there at Capernaum. He's been doing a lot of healing, and it's the next day. And now he is at the edge of the lake, and he sees all this crowd. And a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." Now, that's a harsh-sounding bunch of stuff. In Luke chapter 9, you get a few more details in here. First of all, this young scribe that approaches Jesus, he calls him rabbi, teacher. He said, "I'll follow you wherever you go." That word follow is interesting. It means I'll accompany you, I'll go with you. And basically what he's also saying is no matter where you go, no matter how far you go, no matter how weird it gets, I'll follow you everywhere. Now, it's interesting that Jesus' approach to him was to basically say, I don't even have a place to lay my head. So if you think that following me is going to make you wealthy, it's going to make you powerful, you've mistaken. And I think that's interesting because Jesus didn't really speak to what the man said. What he spoke to was the motive of the man wanting to follow Jesus. And that's what Jesus sees in you and me too, by the way, our motive. And then there's this other disciple that says, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." What you don't get in Matthew, you get in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 9. Jesus had seen this young disciple, and he pointed to him and he said, "Follow me." And the young man said, "Yeah, I'll follow you, but first, let me go and bury my father." Now, this is interesting. Burying my father. The implication is Daddy is still alive. I need to hang around until he dies. How long is that going to be? I don't know. It could be a long time. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's saying he will follow Jesus, but not really. Not really. He doesn't have Jesus as a priority. And now it is important to understand something in Jewish culture, then as in now. Parents are important. You honor your mother and your father. That's one of the mikvahs that is part of the 10 Commandments. One of the commandments that you do is you honor your mother and your father. Typical burial custom of the first century. Well, at that time, when your father or any loved one died, an appropriate loved one would put your body in a tomb. You would be wrapped with linen cloths, and you would have aromatic fragrances embedded in the cloth to reduce the stench of a decaying body. You'd be sealed up in that tomb. 1 year later, your loved one would go back. They would reopen the tomb, and by that time, there'd be nothing but just bones left. So then they would gather the bones and put them in a stone box. The box is called an ossuary. Ossuary. That means a bone box, by the way. So they would gather your bones and put them in this stone box, this ossuary. Then they would take your ossuary and put it elsewhere in the tomb where everyone else's ossuaries were. So you would be gathered together to be with your people, as the Old Testament says in many places. So what this young man is saying is, yeah, I'll follow you, but let me do all these other obligations first. I'll get to you later after these other things that I need to do. And Jesus didn't give him an excuse. He said, "You come follow me now." And then he said something that sounds pretty harsh. Let the dead bury their dead. When you don't make Jesus your number one priority, life can be pretty dead. And that's what Jesus is saying. Thanks for joining me.